And the third topic emailed in today comes to us from Theodore Long, who writes, "Hey John, like most people on Earth, I'm a fan of Christopher Nolan's films. I was wondering, have you heard anything about what his next film will be? Personally, I'd love to see him do a comedy or horror film." All right, thanks a lot for the question, man. And Christopher Nolan's names have been coming up a lot more recently because of all the drama going on with James Bond. There was kind of a push for people wanting to see Christopher Nolan direct a James Bond. I always thought that was a long shot because besides Batman, Nolan seems to just like to create his own stuff. But it was possible. And apparently there were some discussions that happened, but we know it never ultimately happened. Who knows? Maybe he'll be the guy to replace Danny Boyle. We'll have to wait and see. But it's unlikely. But it would be awesome. Anyway. So ever since Dunkirk came out, a lot of people have been wondering, okay, what is he going to do next? You know, he is one of the most respected filmmakers amongst the film community and amongst the fans. He's one of the most respected filmmakers in the world. What will Christopher Nolan do next? I have it in my head. There are three things I would like to see him do. Now, these aren't specific films, like I want to see him do Bond 25. No, it's not specific things, but three general things, three types of movies I would really love to see Christopher Nolan do. Because we've seen that he is great at these typical Christopher Nolan films. We know he's great at that. But there are three types of films I would love to see him expand his repertoire, to see what a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan could do in different types of films. And here are the three that I have in mind particularly. Number one, no surprise, I've said it 1,000 times, and you just said it yourself in your email, a straight-up comedy. I would love to see Christopher Nolan take on a comedy. Now, we know Nolan has a good sense of humor as well. Even some of his more serious films, there are moments of levity and moments that he uses to break up when the tension of a scene is getting too heavy. Christopher Nolan knows how to drop in some levity and stuff like that. So we know he's got a sense for the timing of humor. Could he do that in a straight comedy film? Does he have that in his tool belt? Does he have those skills as a director to deliver a straight comedy? I mean, it doesn't have to be a straight comedy. I mean, it could be a little bit of comedy action or comedy whatever, but a film that is primarily a comedy. Could Christopher Nolan do something like that and then engage and entertain us? We know he would build a good story in it, but can he give the laughs? Can he direct that thing and pace it in such a way that it delivers the laughs all the way through? I'm not saying he couldn't, and I'm not saying he could. I'm just saying we've never seen this incredible filmmaker, Christopher Nolan, even attempt something like that. I would love to see him give it a try and see what he could do. Because until he starts showing me a little bit more in his tool belt, we often have these discussions about the Mount Rushmore of directors, right? And whenever I talk about it, I never have Christopher Nolan on that list. For a couple of reasons. One, his career is still too young. Let's have that discussion again in another 10 or 15 years. But the second one is I need to see him do more. He has yet to make a bad film. Every film he's made is at least good. Not many directors can say that. Some of them straight up outstanding. But can he do more? And comedy is one of the things I'd really like to see him try. The second thing that I've said before, but you also had mentioned in your email here, is indeed horror. Horror is another one of those high experiential genres of films where really the experience of the film is like, look, all film are experiential events. Okay, I've said that many times. But there are a couple of films where the experience really becomes even more to the forefront. I believe two of those are comedy and horror. So the flip side of that comedy coin that I would love to see Christopher Nolan take a crack at is horror. Can he bring that tension? Can he bring the scares? We know, like comedy, he would build a good story around it, but can he then deliver on the horror film experience and deliver on that level? I don't know that he can, and I don't know that he can't, but all I know is as a film fan, man, I'd be hella curious to see what a horror film directed by Christopher Nolan. And I'm not talking some horror franchise. I'm not saying Christopher Nolan do a Friday the 13th movie or Christopher Nolan do a Child's Play movie or Christopher Nolan do a Nightmare on Elm Street. No. A Christopher Nolan original straight up horror film. I would be fascinated to see what he could do with that. I think it would be really neat. The third that I'd really like to see him do, because again, it's so far out of what we think of Christopher Nolan's sandbox, is animation. I would love to see a animated film directed by Christopher Nolan. And again, part of the reason that I say animation is because, remember what I said at the beginning here, I want to see a director with the skills of a Christopher Nolan step outside of what's become a little bit of his comfort zone. These types of movies he does are all incredible, but they've kind of over the years developed into a recognizable sandbox that he kind of stays in. I'd like to see him do comedy because it's way outside of that box. I'd love to see him do horror because it's way outside of that box. And the other thing that is way outside of that box is animation. Now, I'm not saying it needs to be a G-rated family animated film or anything. It can be anything. But just working in a different medium would be fascinating to see. Because I will tell you this right now. If in the next 6 years, Christopher Nolan does 2 out of those 3 things, just 2 out of those 3. Let's say he does an animated and a horror, or a comedy and an animated, or whatever. He does just 2 of those. And he brings his standard Christopher Nolan excellence to those films, and he delivers on those films. I'll tell you what, I will instantly put him on that Mount Rushmore of directors. If he shows he can get outside of that sandbox that he plays in so often and bring that Christopher Nolan excellence to something else and something different and something way outside his regular edges, I don't need to wait 10 more years after that. I'll put him on the Mount Rushmore right then and there. If he can show us a glimpse of that Spielberg type of diversity in his filmmaking repertoire, I'll put him on that Mount Rushmore right away. That's just me speaking as an individual fan. You may feel differently, and that's totally cool. So, again, the 3 films I'd love to see Christopher Nolan do, because they each represent a type of filmmaking that is way outside of the traditional Christopher Nolan box, is comedy, horror, and animation. I'm not saying he has to do these things, not at all, but I'll love whatever. I'm dying to see anything Christopher Nolan does. Let's be clear about that. But I'd love to see him try one of those 3 things. That would be great. All right, let's move on now to the 4th email today.